Hello folks, it's me, DeMontropolis, and I'm here to review Episode 2 of Ninja Gaiden on the NES, subtitled The Dark Sword of Chaos, developed by Tecmo and released in 1990. Not too much to talk about with the game's development, but I do remember that on the day I uploaded my review of Ninja Gaiden 1, all the way back in June, the first thing I did right after the upload was stream the sequel in DeMontropolis. And although it was a mostly blind playthrough, oddly enough I was able to beat it on that same day. This confused me, because in my review of Ninja Gaiden 1, I pointed out the high difficulty as a deliberate design choice by the developers to keep players hooked onto the game until they saw it through to the end. Regardless, I continued to play Ninja Gaiden 2 across the following months in preparation for this review, and occasionally the first game for good comparison. Now, I am ready to share my thoughts after playing the game for more than half a year since the first review dropped. So without further ado, let's jump in and immerse into the world of Ninja Gaiden, Episode 2, The Dark Sword of Chaos. First thing I want to talk about is gameplay and how it's been updated. Our fellow ninja, Ryu Hayabusa, looks and controls pretty much the same as he used to, but he has some updated animations, such as posing when you pull back in the air. More importantly, he's got some new mechanics. The first is that Ryu can now climb up and down walls as he pleases, allowing the level design to be more flexible and giving Ryu free control navigating the terrain. This enhanced mobility definitely comes into play with several areas that reward you for skillfully moving around so you can position yourself in just the right spot to attack enemies. That's not the only good change, because Ryu can now throw his sub-weapons on these walls. Previously he was unable to attack while clinging, but now he can finally defend himself, and it feels really cool to unleash a powerful screen-wiping attack while doing so. However, there are certain walls that you cannot climb, along with smaller ledges that can stick Ryu to them like glue and get in your way. This would be fine if the clarity between the different surfaces was more clear, but alas. One example of a wall you can't fully climb is in Act 3-1, serving as an arbitrary way to force you down the lower path, and trying to interact with that wall and scale it feels needlessly janky. Act 2-2 and 4-2 have these smaller ledges that don't need to be climbed at all, but Ryu can still stick to them anyway, and that tends to kill your flow. As for Ryu's Dragon Sword, it still feels good to kill enemies with it. But now there are times where the hitbox is not very clean, thus your sword can whiff more commonly. I know it was made smaller to balance out the massive size it had in the first game, but looking at the boss fight with Kerberos, I should not be having this much trouble trying to hit those pink blobs. They're slower and roughly the same size as Ryu's sword. What do you mean my attack can just go right through it and do nothing? I will say though, I like how taking damage from most enemies and attacks is consistently rounded at 1 damage throughout. It may sound like something that makes the game much easier, but it primarily patches up the annoyances that certain enemies could cause in the first game. No bird deals 3 damage anymore, thank goodness. I don't really like the way knockback and iframes were modified though. In Ninja Gaiden 2, your knockback from harmful damage has been made much stronger and forceful to quote-unquote compensate for longer iframes after getting hit. Yes, you can't get overwhelmed anymore, but I would rather take the franticness that design choice provides over dying more easily to bottomless pits. Now looking at the sub-weapons, I have nothing but praise for how they've evolved. Just like before, each act wipes your current Ninpo and sub-weapon, so you start each act the same way. While Ninja Gaiden 2 still does this, you automatically start off each act with the basic shuriken. It's a nice change I like, because while the sub-weapon still gets the job done and costs less Ninpo ammo than the others, starting out with something so basic encourages you to try out the fancy capabilities of everything else. The only sub-weapon that didn't make it over was the Spin Slash, and looking back at how powerful that attack was, it makes sense to leave it behind for the sake of trying out new things. The replacement is the Fire Dragon Ball, serving as the opposite to the Art of the Fire Wheel by flying diagonally downwards. It may sound odd at first, but it's surprisingly useful as an anti-ground attack. Anytime enemies might be creeping up on you from below, or camping a platform you have to land on, the Fire Dragon Ball has got you covered, and it rips through enemies too. The Invincible Fire Wheel has been modified, so it can now be used at any time for a heftier price. I really like this, as you can possibly carry it across multiple sections before grabbing the next subweapon, and every time you find it, you're always inclined to use it right away. It is also balanced by not being very useful against bosses, as it cannot do multiple hits reliably. The biggest new mechanic to this game are the shadow clones, completely separate from subweapons. By collecting these orange Ryu heads, Ryu splits his body to generate after images that follow his movement half a second later, up to a total of 2 clones. I really wish I could go back in time to relive just how goody I was being able to control Ryu and his buddies. They're that fun. Not just that, but since these shadow clones throw out sword attacks at the same time as Ryu, they can become stronger over time as you learn how to position them correctly for extra coverage. Shadow clones can also multiply subweapon firepower, and sending out 3 projectiles for the price of 1 can generate insane results. Given most subweapons pierce enemies already, you can cover a lot of screen space with this enhanced firepower. The Windmill Star and the Art of the Fire Wheel especially shine thanks to this, particularly with boss fights. Once you know how to position shadow clones alongside you, you can pump out a lot of damage and even kill most bosses with just subweapon usage. Granted, you do have to conserve on Nimpo across the stages if you're to pull it off successfully, which further adds to the skill of the shadow clones. Their potential really does feel limitless, and perfectly builds on Ryu's ninja powers. In order to make shadow clones work on the console though, they all flicker, and that includes the orange subweapons you throw. Because of this, it is easy to lose track of what's going on with all the shadow clone shenanigans that could possibly distract you. Arguably the biggest example is in Act 7-1, where there is a green acidic waterfall in the background and green enemies who run past it. Since they are camouflaged, they can very easily sneak up on you if you're too busy focusing on your shadow clones, an issue that wouldn't be present at all in the first game. As far as collectible goodies are concerned, Ninja Gaiden 2 has modified some things for the better. 1-ups, for example, are much more common to find across the game, with most acts having 1 or even 2 1-ups to come across. With a total of 8 1-ups found throughout the game, it's a much more forgiving number than the first game's measly 3. If that wasn't good enough, 1-ups are even awarded through points now, ensuring that you'll rarely run out of lives if you're playing well. The game does cap your count at 9, unfortunately, which is strange because the first game, despite having a much smaller number, had its 1-up cap at 99. Looking at the Nimpo system, it has been reworked to be more complex than before, which I like. Your total Nimpo capacity is no longer at 99 all the time, as you start the game off at 40. Blue Nimpos still give a set number, but red Nimpos now max out to your current capacity. In order to raise the amount of Nimpo you can hold, you need to find these scrolls across most of each act. For a total of 6 scrolls, you'll cap out at 100 by the end of the game, and once you hit that red Nimpo refill, you can go ballistic with your subweapons. Not just that, but apparently there are 2 hidden scrolls that only appear if you lose to each of the final boss's last 2 phases, which make you play through all of Act 7-2 anyway. The stages this time have evolved through the incorporation of unique and memorable gimmicks, so while they still have a strong focus on enemy combat, it is enhanced thanks to these gimmicks. There's stuff like the icy terrain in Act 5-2, the foreground terrain blocking your vision and even a 1-up in Act 6-1, and rushing water in Act 4-2. Gimmicks like these hardly get in your way, but merely supplement your approach to each situation, and challenge how you work around them or with them. My favorite gimmicks have to be the wind in Act 2-2 and the darkness in Act 3-1. These 2 are arguably the most obtrusive on casual playthroughs, as the direction of your wind may get in your way from progressing until it isn't. Same goes for the darkness if you have no idea where you're going. However, these 2 are my favorites because they can be used to your advantage with enough replay of these levels. Once you reach that point, you'll be blitzing through the darkness in true ninja spirit, and you can become one with the wind regardless of the direction it moves in. They carry a very distinct sense of flow that makes mastering them feel much more satisfying. The most annoying level would probably be Act 5-2, Ashtar's Iceberg. Not because it's icy, but the second half has these large gaps that require a very tight jump to cross. Although I have beaten this game deathless, I usually struggle to clear this level because the way Ryu moves is much different than that of Mega Man. Trying to position yourself on the last pixel of your sprite in order to make that jump is hopeless thanks to the ice, so your best bet is to wing it with a running jump and pray you don't miss the platform. As far as aesthetics go, the stages continue to have distinct identities with their visuals, even though they aren't as tied to the story as the first game's levels are. Act 1-1 starts you off in the shadows of an illuminated city, with Act 2-1 immediately jumping to a moving train, with parallax so beautifully designed, even pausing the game can't stop it. Act 4-1 has this huge wall of fire, and Act 7-2 has these pulsating hearts in the background like you're wandering through the insides of a giant beast. Even when levels don't have a gimmick, they're still distinct enough to remember. Speaking of visuals, I love how this game took that iconic Temple of Darkness cutscene and did it twice. Now you get 2 epic shots for each of the most important locations in the game. The Tower of Laja, observed from the mountains you just conquered, and the World of Darkness ironically looks so beautiful against the red ocean and Ryu clinging onto that wall. Really good stuff. Ninja Gaiden 2 also manages to evolve the enemies substantially, even though it is less visually diverse. To start, there are a few crawling enemies that go low to the ground when approaching you, and since the Dragon Sword has a smaller hitbox, you are usually forced to crouch in order to hit them. I especially like the Satyr fellows. They may seem slow at first, but they can scale even the highest walls in order to reach you. There are also a few wacky enemies who can appear all over, forcing a quick reaction out of you. These include the red ninjas who suddenly jump from off screen to throw shurikens, fireballs that poof in from nowhere, and lava balls that rise from pits to release more lava balls during the descent. And of course, the infamous birds. Although they no longer deal 3 damage, these guys still manage to have a problem. In this case, they have much larger hitboxes than what it seems. A bird doesn't even have to touch your sprite anymore in order to send you flying, and in the situations where attacking them is not ideal, their deceptively large hitboxes can be frustrating to avoid. Probably the most clever thing done with the enemies is that the Malice 4 from the first game got turned into smaller enemies, amping up the complexity. You won't really notice it with the Barbarian Juniors at the start of the game, but you will when Act 3-2 throws both a Massacre Jr. and a Bomberhead Jr. together, each with a distinctive behavior, and even 2 Bloody Moth Juniors at the end. Although it's funny to think about how these past bosses had children up to the wazoo, the junior enemies are up there for the most fun enemies in the game. Plus, they tie in well with the game's story. Although Ninja Gaiden 2 is a bit less reliant on its enemies, thanks to all the gimmicks, this allows the level design to loosen up their placements. There aren't many strict maneuvers that enemies force you to do, like how the first game set them up, which also means level flow isn't as tight. However, enemy setups and placements overall are much more chaotic and reactive. You can study these levels as much as you want, but it still won't prepare you for just how overwhelming the challenge can be sometimes. However, I feel like this came off as both a blessing and a curse. On the bad side, the game overall felt oddly easy to bludgeon through on my first blind playthrough. I said at the beginning that I was able to beat this game on the same day that I started playing it, and I only got a single game over that playthrough. It was a shock because, by comparison, I remember putting in so much effort to beating Ninja Gaiden 1 for the first time, and after I accomplished that, doing it deathless didn't take very long. Failure was how I learned to overcome that game's challenges, but with Ninja Gaiden 2, I didn't learn much on that first day. On the good side though, the game's replay value has become more difficult to master, and it gives the game a unique kind of difficulty. Since the level design is a lot looser, there usually isn't one set way to complete a challenge. It's this feeling where the game may be easy on a first go-around, but trying to do better is where you'll consistently get stumped. This made the road to Deathless feel much more satisfying and challenging to do consistently, and I think that's the true beauty of Ninja Gaiden 2's design. I should also mention the OST for the stages are excellent. Each song sets the mood of its respective area very well, once again opting for frantic melodies, but also building compositions around set motifs. Act 2-2 and Act 3-1, for example, have their own motifs that play throughout most of their loop length, but it never feels repetitive, as these motifs lay a strong foundation for the rest of the composition to build off of. And the list goes on from there, with Act 2-1 a delightfully upbeat romp, and Act 4-1 a calmer, almost enlightening elegy by contrast. Now let's get into the Tecmo Theater side of things, and boy, I got quite a lot to talk about with here. Starting us off is the iconic opening cutscene, instantly recognizable with that shot of Ashtar watching over the purple sky from his castle. He's the new baddie in town, and he makes it very clear how much he's packing. Jakio just got defeated? Just as I thought. The ninja's on his way? Lure him on. And as Ashtar continues his monologue, you get quick shots of the three main characters caught in the center of his scheme. That song playing throughout is really good too, building up very well to reflect Ashtar's newfound dominance. In fact, there's a good variety of cutscene music well crafted across different setups. You can definitely tell which songs represent Inquisition, or when there's a fearsome encounter. And although certain songs are reused plenty, many scenes carry unique songs to them. However, there are certain cutscene musics that either fail to stand out or stand out for the wrong reasons. My least favorite song in the game is the one called Tearful Reunion, which is designed to be Irene's theme whenever Ryu reunites with her. This song plays a total of 4 times, usually in situations that are meant to be more reserved and quiet, such as when Ryu holds her in his arms. But this song is way too bouncy and loud for these scenarios. It kills the intended mood and takes me out of it. After Ryu dispatches the enemies of Act 1, he comes across a unit of the military. Introducing himself as Robert T. Sturgeon, he's a cool ally, really the only one besides Irene, who updates Ryu on the current situation, and he even gets a few moments to actually play a part in the action and shoot at enemies. I like the little mind game done here where it seems like Robert just randomly shot Ryu for no reason. But nah, he just shot the first boss. It's a cool subversion to those who remember the first game's identical cutscene. I do wish that when he saved Ryu from Ashtar, and Ashtar called him a sewer rat, that's when Robert should have dropped the jungle rat line. He does get to sacrifice himself in a noble way to buy Ryu more time at least. Ultimately though, the plot is more generic and straightforward than the first games, which is undoubtedly Ninja Gaiden 2's main weakness. What Ashtar's big plan amounts to is simply kidnapping Irene in order to lure Ryu, and this one plot point takes place over 5 of the 7 acts. It makes story progression more linear and less interesting, because with the first game, each act was telling a new chapter of the story and actually evolving the stakes over time. Here, you're playing the damsel in distress card until you're not, and I have more cons lined up for this because I feel like Tecmo could have done much better with this one. Yes, the first game's story was so well crafted that it would be hard to top, but it seems like the story writers kinda just gave up halfway through. Also, Irene Liu does not get a chance to do anything other than be a damsel in distress. Even after Act 5 when she's saved, she gets abducted right away and put on the sidelines, and then basically dies from events out of her control. And it's so strange, because if you look at her act pose, as funny and oddly proportioned as is, she's holding a gun there, implying that there was the idea to let her fight back in the same way that Robert can. Even her little chibi design in the sound test gets to fire a gun. Oh well, at least she gets to suck off Ryu after getting stabbed. Props to her for reminding us why her code name is Sea Swallow. Ryu's ascension up the Tower of Laja is where he first encounters Ashtar, and I like how fearsome and formidable he is when he's present. Ashtar wastes no time launching a dark sword ball at Ryu to stun him, and his killing blow is only stopped by Robert in the nick of time. In the final confrontation, Ashtar actually learned from this and opted to stun Robert first, right away. Him stabbing Irene was something that caught me by surprise too, and it made that following boss battle feel much more personal to Ryu. Speaking of Ashtar's dark sword, it has some great parallels between Ryu's own dragon sword, hyping them up as the embodiments of good and evil. Both were created from the body parts of these powerful monsters, and when Ryu and Ashtar are ready to duel, both of their weapons begin glowing to flex their power. While the dark sword has the power to drain life in order to become stronger, an act that feeds on selfishness, the dragon sword sacrifices its tangible form to revive a deceased Irene, only when Ryu truly believes she is gone and all hope is lost. However, the game doesn't try to properly unwrap the mystery of the titular Dark Sword of Chaos. Beyond what I said earlier, there isn't any deeper world building built around the sword's creation and how Ashtar managed to get a hold of it, or why he waited until now to start using it. As cool of a character Robert is, he just tells the player everything they need to know at face value, which even comes at the expense of Ryu Hayabusa. Outside of a few lines, he spends most of the story being the "huh? What?" kind of character who asks too many questions for the player. As far as the setting and locations go, they have many similar names that blend too much together. Outside of the Tower of Laja, everything else is themed around darkness and chaos. There's the Realm of Darkness, the Gate of Darkness, the World of Chaos, the Maze of Darkness, the World of Darkness, even Ashtar himself calls himself the Emperor of Darkness. Good grief, might as well take a shot every time I say the word darkness in this review. Most cutscenes also reuse a lot of shots across the game, such as the side views of each character during regular conversations, or this one shot of Irene where she looks decapitated without her shoulders. It can make many scenes feel samey, but also to the point where certain plot details are not conveyed clearly. Most of the Ashtar cutscenes show him in a front-facing perspective, rarely doing much in other perspectives. When I played this game for the first time, I couldn't even tell that Ashtar died after his defeat. I saw him teleport the dark sword away and utter a prayer before his sprite faded away, but nothing about that scene conveyed him dying. I know Ryu defeated him in battle, but I thought he just teleported or ran away like he did before. Before I continue with the story, I want to touch upon the game's main bosses. While they're still easily defeated by coming in prepared with 2 shadow clones and enough ninpo to nuke them with fire wheels and Dragon Balls, they have generally stepped it up in complexity to become more engaging with casual play. Dando the Cursed is very similar to the Barbarian, but he now has a charge attack that can force you off the walls. Baron von Spider evades contact as much as possible, and thanks to his wall-climbing spiders and the presence of wind, trying to consistently confront him is tricky. Funky Dynamite is one of the more dynamic bosses, packing many types of firepower depending on whether he's flying around or sent to the ground, and the fact that he cannot be hurt on the ground adds an extra layer of timing and strategy. Even Kelberos returns and is more aggressive than before, and the only one closest to being a dud is Nagasotuva. He feels oddly simple for the 4th boss, but still manages to be enjoyable with how flexible the arena is. Ashtar's fight though is way too easy and underwhelming of a boss, especially for one of the most important bosses in the game. All he does is teleport around, and every time he does, 8 fireballs spawn relative to his position and come to him. You pretty much have to play guesswork with where to stand, because most of the time the fireballs spawn right on top of you. Despite this cheap tactic, the fireballs are really slow, and Ashtar has such a big body that he's guaranteed to take more damage than he can actually dish out. When the fight first starts, he lines up perfectly with the art of the fire wheel, so before he can do anything, he's helpless, and you can get off 9 damage right off the bat. After Ashtar's death though, the game pulls a sneaky plot twist by bringing back Jakio as a backup villain. I always thought this was a good turn of events, because Ashtar still lives on through his dark sword, and the responsibility of unleashing its power has been passed on to Jakio, who looks much more menacing and bizarre in this game. and given how you've been fighting baby versions of the Malice 4, plus a rematch against Kerberos, why wouldn't Jaquio come back at this point? As cool as it is for Jaquio to return, the game does a very poor job of explaining how he came back. When Ryu meets Jaquio at the end of Act 7, the sorcerer says a lot of confusing and vague descriptions that are open to interpretation on what he actually means, such as with 2 sentences that contradict each other in logic. The spirit released after a battle flowed into my body, and the spirit you defeated was nothing more than a pawn. The spirit in question could either be Jaquio himself or even Ashtar, so depending on how you look at it, Jaquio either reincarnated through Ashtar's spirit and came back to life after his death, or Jaquio was simply alive this whole time and waited for Ashtar to fail. If anyone has a well-crafted theory about what could have actually happened, let me know. While the story is very simple, the presentation has this gritty and raw nature that does not hold back. I always liked how Ryu talks back to Jaquio with his anti-speech and the most peeved look in his eyes. But more notably, Ninja Gaiden 2 has a surprising amount of blood that was never censored in the original NES release. And it's insane to think about because there are mature scenes deliberately shoving blood in your face. After Ashtar stabs Irene and taunts Ryu about it, he flexes his bloody sword and you can see the liquid dripping down the blade. When Jaquio is first killed, next to his limp hand is this huge pool of blood that keeps getting bigger and bigger until it touches the dark sword and all hell breaks loose. The final boss battle is pioneered by Jaquio with 3 phases back to back, and each of them have a really good challenge to make for the best boss in the game. His wizard form is much looser and chaotic than his pattern in the first game, again reflecting the second game's newfound philosophy. I've grown to really like this fight, as his fireballs and fast movement keep you engaged at all times. His second form turns him into the Great Wall of Jaquio, and while it's the most simple phase, it's also the most claustrophobic with acid dripping everywhere. The last form merges Jaquio and Jashin together, so it's very similar in structure to Jashin's original fight, but with the addition of sweeping hands and a fireball stream to protect the boss's head. Not only is it a really good challenge fighting all 3 phases back to back, but this time you do not get health restored across these fights. If you want to go deathless, you have to beat all 3 in a row with 1 health bar. So, in the end, I have 29 pros and 15 cons. There was definitely more to talk about with Ninja Gaiden 2 as opposed to the first game, at least for me. But the way I see it, each game has different factors to their enjoyment. As I played Ninja Gaiden 2 more and more, I realized that while it is overall an easier game to beat, the real magic is how you can improve your performance. I can't lie when I say the game got me hooked with mechanics like the shadow clones and level gimmicks tailored around improving your skills in the long run. No matter how much I play this game, it never ceases to impress me and reward me, because it always felt like there's room for improvement. It was a tough call whether I ultimately like Ninja Gaiden 1 or 2 more, but in the end, I chose the sequel. So with that, I'm going to give Ninja Gaiden 2, The Dark Sword of Chaos, a rating of 9 out of 10. Amazing! And that's the end of this review. If you like what you saw, consider giving a like and subscribe to my channel. Leave a comment if you have something to say, and as per usual, my Discord server, DeMontropolis, is in the description, so consider joining if you like my content. 2 weeks from now will be the 2nd anniversary of glorious content. With this anniversary approaching, I will have a special video ready that celebrates it and goes over what I accomplished this past year. And if I work hard enough, I might be able to sneak in one more review before that 2nd anniversary deadline. And with that said, I'll be signing off. Take care, folks.